Hello, everybody. I'm David Tickner, the Chief Executive of the Civil Service Retirement Fellowship, and I'm delighted to welcome you to 60 Voices, a special podcast launched to celebrate the 60th anniversary of the Civil Service Retirement Fellowship in 2025. In this series, we will be sharing the fascinating stories and personal reflections of former civil servants as they look back on their careers and the impact they had on the nation. 60 Voices aims to conserve and preserve these important work memories, from the challenges they faced to the memorable moments that define their work. Each episode will offer a unique personal insight into the history of the UK civil service and the people who shaped it. Whether you're a former colleague or someone interested in public service, we invite you to join us as we explore the voices behind decades of dedication, service, and legacy. I'm delighted to introduce my co-host for this, Denise Headley, who will be joining me for the series. Denise is the CSRF's Deputy Chief Executive and has an extensive background in broadcasting and commentary. So for our first episode, I'd like to welcome Jean Anderson. Jean is a hugely supportive member of the CSRF community and has been an indefatigable office volunteer for us for over 10 years. And we are very pleased to have her with us. So welcome, Jean, to the 60 Voices podcast.
Thank you.
Lovely to see you, Jean.
Thank you.
And to kick off the very first podcast, a very easy question for you to ruminate on, which is what made you choose civil service as a career?
Well, it was sort of really by default. I had I was a student studying for a degree in humanities, and I didn't really know exactly what I wanted to do. My mum and her older brother were both in the civil service, and my mother's mother thought it was a very good thing to do because it gave you security and a pension. And also from my point of view, I thought, well, I'll join it because that was sort of in a way where I was being pushed towards. And I thought, well, if I don't like it and I think of something I really want to do, I can always leave and do that. And the other thing was, I was never an exceptional student, and I thought, well, just supposing I fail my degree, there'd be no point in applying for something that was graduate entry anyway, just in case. But I could get in with my A-level and O-levels, which I'd already got. So I applied to the civil service while I was in my third year as a student, and it would also mean I'd got a job to go straight into. But the civil service took a very long time to get round to clearing me and everything. So in the meantime, I was working in a quilt factory on Harrow and Lincoln, ironing quilts. Because obviously as a student, I had lots of different jobs, and my parents were keen for me to do something. And in those days, you contributed to your keep.
I think I recall, Jean, from when you kindly gave us some advanced info, that you had quite a trek when you took the civil service exam, if that is me correct. Do you want to share that with us?
You're probably reading between the lines, realised how incompetent I can be. And one of my problems is that I've got no sense of direction. The civil service, because they sent me a list of things that departments I might like and jobs I might be interested in. And one of them was to do with, I think, puzzles and codes and language. And I didn't realise that that was leading to the Cheltenham security place. I can't remember what it's called now.
GCHQ.
Thank you, GCHQ. Which had a lot of trouble later on with Mrs. Thatcher. So they sent me to Bristol to be interviewed, which is presumably the nearest interview place. And I thought they'd probably made a mistake because there were different codes. And I rang them up and said, it's something like 01 for London, 10 for Bristol. Have you just muddled up your code numbers? And they said no. I got lost. On my way there, I rang them up from a public phone box because in those days there were no smartphones or any mobile phones at all. And the person who at the other end, I said, if I tell you where I am, can you direct me to how to get there? And she said no.
What?
I was distraught.
Why wouldn't she get
That was my first early experience of the civil service.
very rigorous with the rules? Do you know why she said no?
I didn't ask her why. No, I mean, anyway. So eventually I found it. I did the exam, but I just felt too upset to be interviewed.
So what happened, Jean, after that? Did they allow you back for a second interview?
Well, yeah, what happened was, obviously I went home again. I didn't claim expenses, which, and I just explained, and they just sort of had to accept it, really. I just sort of stood in front of the board and said, I just didn't feel I was in a fit state to be interviewed. I mean, presumably I told them that they couldn't direct me to where it was. Whether the person at the other end, the girl at the other end, got told off, I don't know. Presumably not. These guys are going to do it again. So my mum helped me write an apologetic letter and asking for a second chance. And they sent me to London that time. And thank heavens I didn't end up in GCHQ because of all the problem we had later on. And I probably wouldn't have had the ability anyway to crack the codes. Especially someone who can't find the premises is a most unlikely spy, aren't there, Ruth?
You did jolly well. And was that your first time out of London, Jean, when you went down to Bristol?
Oh, it's probably my first time on my own.
On your own, yeah.
My degree, I did. I was on a week's geography field course, but we were taken around by coach then, so there wasn't really any chance of getting lost. We climbed up Glastonbury Tor and saw and went in a cigarette factory and all sorts of things. But normally, or even if I was on holiday, I wouldn't be on my own.
But your second interview was in London, was it? When they invited you back, you didn't have to go quite as far as Bristol.
No. I think it's probably very sensibly GCHQ had dropped the idea of regarding me as a possibly suitable employee.
And what year did you actually start in the civil service?
I started in 1974.
1974. There you go.
So it was in the summer. I was ironing quilts that summer until I kept getting my mum to ring up because I couldn't really, because you only got half an hour lunch break and I had to go to a public call box to ring up the civil service and ask them, when I could come. My mum was like my secretary in those days.
So, Jean, could I ask you a quick question now? What was it like joining the civil service in the 70s in terms of the culture, the way the organisation, essentially was? What was it like joining? And, the difference between that and obviously the quilt factory, what was the whole environment like?
Well, the quilt factory was full of feathers and sewing machines and like that, because it was a factory. Mainly,
And lots of steam, I imagine.
Mainly women there, and some even past retirement age, quite a few foreigners, and including one lady who I was there when Cyprus got invaded by the Turks. And break, she was in tears because she couldn't contact her family or anything. Whereas civil service was very white, very male culture, much more formal. You called yourself by surnames, Mr. whatever, say Smith or something, not first names. Nowadays, we're much more informal, I think. Smoking, of course, was very prevalent. So if you went into somebody's office and they smoked, you'd have an interview in a very smoky room. Yes, very different indeed. But of course, though, it does reflect society. Society was very different too.
And quite male dominated, you're saying as well.
Yes. And more white dominated as well.
Yes, that's true. Yeah.
And in terms of the role of women and you joining the service, how were you able, how did you learn to work with that culture? Because in the previous job that you were having, there was a lot more women of different ages, different generations, different community. So how did you then have to adjust to that environment? And what sort of skills did you deploy to adjust?
Don't worry, Denise. In the quilt factory, the men were still in charge. In fact, I don't think there were any men actually working on the sewing machines or in the feathers room stuffing the quilts with feathers, or where I was ironing the quilts. So if anything, the civil service was slightly more equal because you had men even in junior grades, although not so much, So that there we are. But I
Do you, sorry, go on, Jean.
I've noticed a weird thing though, like that comedy sketch with John Cleese, and so on with three men. Even I reckon tall men tended to succeed better than shorter ones. So it's not just a culture to do with sex. I think if you look the part, sound the part, look the part, you're more likely to get on.
Well, that's a good argument.
Oh.
That's interesting because I know that when I'd spoken to you in the past, you said to me that men and women were not allowed to have relationships. They weren't, it was all very, you weren't allowed to, for argument, date your co-workers. And there was a real strict.
Well, you were allowed to, but if you were a woman and you're married, you just expected to leave.
Leave your job.
Yes, that's right.
That's true, actually, because within our own community, we've got an awful lot of people who joined the Civil Service Retirement Fellowship as life members who are all myths. They never married because obviously they presumably, based on what you've just said there, Jean, they focus on career as opposed to marriage because they wanted not to have to leave at the time and focus on building their career within the civil service.
Yes, my mum would like me to say at this point that she was actually quite radical because when she married, she worked for a whole year. So the things were, even in those days, in 1951, before I was born, things were moving a little bit. But certainly there would have been no provision for maternity leave or anything like that. Once children came along, so the idea of women working and looking after children was strange. And yet we just had the Second World War, hadn't we? Where it must have been very common indeed because women were expected to go out to work. So it shows you how all of a sudden the society can do a U-turn if it suits it. And then, of course, a U-turn back again.
Yeah.
Then
Yes, because, of course, obviously, you're quite right. Because, during the war, when obviously the soldiers were out, the women did all the work. They were, running factories, offices, and I should imagine there was a certain degree of disgruntlement when everyone came back. They were quite happy actually forging careers, then be told, actually, you need to go back to doing what you were doing because all these people are coming back in to take the work again. Jean, I've just got as an extension to Denise's question. Do you remember your first day? The actual first day you started at civil service.
Yes.
How was that? Were you terribly nervous?
To it as well because my parents, to make sure we didn't have another debacle, they took me at the weekend to exactly where I had to report to make sure I didn't get lost again. So they were very keen for me to join the civil service.
So you remembered it then? You remembered it?
Shot round the corner. I wouldn't have got lost. Yeah. Anyway, so yes, I do remember because we were all we were all allocated to different places. That at that point, I found out I was going to be working in the prison service, which I thought how grim. And different people were allocated to different places, and then we were all told to go off to those places and report for duty. So although my parents had hoped to take me to the right place, which they did, I then of course had to find somewhere just off the Haymarket on my own, which fortunately I did because we were given a little map. And although all the roads weren't on it, I sort of was able to work it out by the shape of the roads. And I remember when I reported as well, because I was supposed to report to someone called Mr. Barlow. And the lady on reception looked completely blank. So in the end I said, have you got a Mr. Barlow working here? And she said, yes. So I thought, well, that must be the person I'm supposed to report to. And she rang him up and he came down and he was a very friendly Yorkshireman. And he was, I think he was a couple of years away from retirement, a natural extrovert. And I found out at his retirement a couple of years later that he'd actually flown bomber planes because the person who gave his speech said, when we talk about if we do this, we might get flak. Larry knew what real flak was. Really, killed you. So that was my first day, and so I was very happy there with him, and the other two people below him made me welcome, and Larry and one of the other people were going to a prison the following day, and they suggested taking me with them.
Very good.
So on my second day, I went to Winson Green Prison, which is Birmingham Prison. And of course, luckily I was with them, so I didn't have any chance of getting lost.
Could I ask you then, Jean, about when working in the prison service? What was your actual activities? What were you doing while you were there? What were your duties, for argument's sake?
Yes, I was in a section called the quarters section, and in those days, prison officers were entitled to married quarters or bachelor accommodation. Years ago, a lot more jobs had accommodation with them than now. Police officers, prison officers, even some caretakers might have a house that goes with the estate that they're managing, and the quarters had to be within certain standards if they weren't purpose built, and so we were buying quarters on the open market.
You're buying flats and that.
They were normally, well, most of them, 3-bedroomed houses.
Wow.
There was
How much did they cost?
there was a smaller sort, for and a larger sort for larger families. I hope I'm allowed to tell you all of this, because I certainly probably wouldn't have been at the time. You had to sign the Official Secrets Act, and you weren't allowed to say anything about what you did.
And that sort of level of secrecy, do you think that permeated other areas of your life, that you had to be, that kind of mindset leached into your personal space at all?
But yeah, very, very much so. Just to also say, we weren't just buying quarters. Prison officers who had problems with their quarters, they if they couldn't be sorted out locally by the foreman of works, the works department, would be referred to us. And an old chestnut was, because in those days gas heating was a lot cheaper than electric heating. A lot of people with electric heating wanted to be converted to gas. Well, we couldn't just do it because their bills would be cheaper. And yes, it did permeate into my life. I remember I went for an induction course shortly afterwards, and there was a chap in the security department gave us a talk, and he said that there was two sorts of vetting. There was the negative vetting, which we'd all had to before we applied, which must have been taking place all those weeks while I was working in the quilt factory and well before. And there was positive vetting, and I fell out with the security services because I said, you told us a bit about negative vetting. What does positive vetting involve?
Mm.
And he sort of got a bit sniffy and said, I can't tell you anything about that, because I suppose you can't, could you? Because I had no idea about security, what you can say and what you can't say. By the sounds of it, I still can't. And so I tried to make a joke of it. I said, oh, I just wonder, if you had us followed or something like that. And he said, well, I could have you followed if I wanted, or something like that. And I thought, well, I mean, there you go. I wouldn't notice, to be honest, if I had been followed, and still wouldn't. But there you go. They struck me as rather hostile and sinister people. And I decided that a high security job was probably not suitable for me either. But of course, GCHQ would have been high security, wouldn't it?
Definitely. The CSRF, the Civil Service Retirement Fellowship, is a charity set up for civil servants by civil servants. In 1960, Douglas Houghton MP highlighted the need for an organisation that supported retired civil servants, offering friendship and companionship. 59 years later, we are still carrying on his dream. You can find out more about the CSRF at our website, www.csrf.org.uk. Why not sign up to become a digital donor for £3, less than the price of coffee? Or you may wish to volunteer. Contact us via the website.
So, Jean, I actually wanted to pick up on, I mean, obviously you started work, listening to what you were saying about the work you were doing with the prison department sounds quite similar, I think, to the property services agency that was within the civil service that also did similar things for armed forces, because my dad was ex-military and they had a property management company, probably a bit similar to that was responsible for married quarters and making sure properties were, in the right state of repair. So
It sounds very similar.
yeah,
Yes,
very similar.
very worthwhile work and very interesting.
Yeah.
But really, because you're providing homes for people and families. That's how to hear it.
So you started in the prison department, but as I'm aware, with obviously the many conversations I've had with members of our community, people do move around quite frequently within the civil service. So I was going to ask, obviously you started there. Could you give us a sort of a snapshot of where you went from the prison service? And also, what I was particularly keen to find out about is what skills you picked up as you went through your civil service journey, because the civil service has always been very good at developing people. And I think as an employer, has a hugely diverse approach to employment, even now, in terms of the different employment and work journeys that the people within the different departments are working on. I wondered if you would be able to share a little bit of what you've picked up, what you felt you picked up during your career from a skills point of view or a personal development point of view, or, as you went through your career. And obviously for the benefit of the listeners, also to perhaps share where your career took you, because obviously we know you started in the prison department, and where did you go? What was your journey from that point and what you learned along the way?
Thank you. Yes, well, certainly in my first job, I learned to look up plans, and I became quite interested in which I still am, just the design of houses, the convenience of where the rooms are in relation to each other and the size and so on and so forth. Probably learned a little bit about heating and so on. Was quite a bit of calculation involved to make sure that they were within 10% tolerance of the standard. Also, various procedures we had to go through liaising with the Treasury solicitors who did the legal part. So, and the prison that would submit the details in the first place, and making the forms were in order and had got the signature of the POA and so on them. Subsequently, I developed managerial skills ultimately, and ended up with a section of over many years later of over 20 people. I
Wow.
also was involved when I was in the Police Complaints Authority with supervising investigations, and I believe I developed certain investigatory skills, which I put in to play once, where I had to investigate a member of staff who had had a complaint made against him about his behaviour in another department. I also developed skills about being interviewed, because at first I didn't realise how important it was to prepare for interviews, but once I was in the personnel department, I realised a lot more about the interview process than I had before, and that basically they're looking for you to prove that you can do the job at a higher level. So you need to first of all work out exactly what those extra skills are, and also luckily I was in another place where there was grading guidance, which actually tells you the different grades and what different things that they are expected to do. And I must have developed quite a bit about security through the prison service and the culture of the Home Office, about I suppose secrecy and because I worked in a place once where there was a security part, and they would just, you go up to a counter and you weren't allowed to go any further. So I was aware that there was some very secure places, and also regarding security, the civil service acts on the need to know principle, and that means you never tell anybody anything unless they need to know it, and that actually is a very very good way of making sure that secrets don't get passed about. Also, there were various countries that you couldn't go to, like Russia and Yugoslavia, or if you did go there on holiday or something, you had to be interviewed by the security services first. Well, I certainly wasn't going to go anywhere like that. But and some I know that even from very junior jobs, hostile powers, as they might be called, can get useful information, like car number plates or even what you do.
And of course, not to forget, you were working in the Cold War. So, I mean, there was a very heightened sense of security, wasn't there, in terms of
Different time.
yeah, exactly, a very different time. So I would imagine security was even more heightened during the sort of the Cold War period with, the communist bloc and obviously the Western powers in terms of how they approach things.
Plus, of course, we had the IRA bombs going off in London. We had a lot of instructions as to suspect packages if they got wires coming out or any sort of leakage that looked greasy, and how to handle phone calls if somebody was giving a warning, and so on and so forth. Yeah, so lots of security. Well, and the whole of London was aware. You could have a bomb put in a litter bin or something. Litter bins disappeared from stations and so on.
That's true. I mean, actually, in fairness, that's actually almost still true now in terms of in areas where you have government departments. It's very difficult to find a letterbox anywhere to actually post a letter on in the way that they used to. You have letterboxes all over the place. But yeah.
And we had special net which would billow out. So if there was an explosion, the idea was that they would retain all the shards of glass or debris in the curtain. And later on we had, I'm probably not supposed to tell you this, am I? Some sort of a film put over their glass as well to hold it together.
It's on a need-to-know basis now, Jean.
Exactly.
I think maybe you'd better get the security department.
Maybe they might enjoy our podcast, listening to some memories from,
If you get a knock on the door, Jean, if you get a knock on the door after the podcast, you've infringed the security. Inadvertently, absolutely. Yeah, go for it.
Right. Thank you very much for also submitting some, guidance to us in terms of what you did before. And I just looked here that you said that you were involved in the Police Complaints Authority at its very inception. And I'd like you to just elucidate on that a bit more. And what was the original ideas about it and what your thoughts are about the Police Complaints Authority?
It came in with a new bit of legislation called the Police and Criminal Evidence Act, 1985 or 1984, and it was called PACE for short, PACE. And the idea was there was a lot of distrust about the police, especially amongst the black community, and the police used to investigate their own sort of misdemeanors, any conduct that was a bit didn't look too good. And the Independent Police Complaints Authority brought in 4 people with a certain amount of one of the words the board was looking for, I believe, was gravitas, from different members of different parts of the community to supervise the investigations, which were still done by the police, but the authority member, could direct them to do what they wanted, seize what evidence they want, interview whoever they wanted, and they would read all of the statements and so on and so forth. And it was I was one of the 4 people who was the assistant to the authority members, and each authority member had a certain number of police forces allocated to them. And my authority member was Bernard Clements, who came from British Guyana. And he was a black
countryman. Air Dalston.
And hopefully I was a good assistant to him because he didn't, I think he didn't always have manage well to fit in with the other. There was a woman as well, Mrs. Vickers, and two other men, one of whom had been he was called Captain Taylor. He'd been a captain of big oil tankers. He'd worked
Wow.
at BP or something like
Of a random choice.
they had between them, they must have had the most amazing skills.
Yeah.
But Vernon's background was race relations and unions. So that's sort of how he got into it. And I
So, in your time with the Police Complaints Authority, you saw it evolve. What were your thoughts about its evolution and the way it then became, what's the word I'm looking for? Everything evolves in the time that it is there. So as you were there during the period, what kind of evolutions did you see and what did you think about the way it changed?
Well, I was only there probably certainly for less than 2 years.
Okay.
So I really was there how it started up, because it didn't really, it was new to itself, if you see what I mean. So it had to establish its own procedures. And so as a result, there were lots of regular meetings. There were press conferences and so on, especially at the launch. There would be a press conference, if there was some particularly heinous incident. And they were very much feeling their way.
Mm.
So I left not voluntarily, but we had a staff inspection, and which you had in those days. That's another thing. Whereas the civil service changed, it would have been under Mrs. Thatcher, to a financially managed organisation, whereby you were given a budget and you could have as many staff as you could afford with that budget. But when I was in the Police Complaints Authority, my earlier part of my career, you had staff inspectors, and they looked at every job, what they did to make sure the job was fully loaded and got enough work to do. And secondly, what level that work was. And they decided that me and my other 3 assistants were not needed at the level we were. And so I was moved to somewhere else, back into the prison service, where I worked dealing with complementing and grading.
How did you feel about that assessment that you were maybe not as needed as you were in the earlier 2 years? How did you feel about the move?
Well, to be honest, the staff inspectors to some extent were right, but the Police Complaints Authority really perhaps should have used their individual assistants better than they did. They tended very much, the 4 of them, to meet with each other and discuss things with each other. But I mean, I like to think that I was a good assistant to mine, and I can remember an incident when, because of the need to know principle that I've already told you, one of the things that we were supervising the investigation of was something to do with a sort of fix in Kent, where a police officer, like a whistleblower, had said they're false, making, altering the statistics, the crime cleanup statistics. And it was decided that because it was we were investigating, I think, because normally if it was a serious allegation, you had a different force investigating, but if it was less serious, you had the same force, that they would do a sort of secret sort of swipe. They would go into the offices where these records were kept and seize, that's the word I'm looking for, seize the records. And I was at the meeting, and I said to my authority member, we don't need to know when this, on the date when this seizure is going to happen, because with the need to know principle, that, the fewer people that know, the better, because otherwise, somebody could tell them. And I think it was either the following day or very shortly afterwards, it was at their headlines on the Evening Standard or, evening paper, Met seizures, blah, blah, blah. And I said to Vernon, well, at least they can't blame you, because we agreed with the need to know principle. You didn't know when this was going to take place, because under my suggestion.
just as a supplemental, I mean, it's not really a question, it's more of of an observation. It must be interesting as an employee working in an environment, knowing that something like that's coming. And then you see it in the national newspaper. I mean, it makes you realize that your role in it, your importance in it, even though that you're not seen in the front, you're not seen as the person who's directing things, but you know that your work was integral into, for argument's sake, addressing corruption. That's a big deal, I think.
The civil service is very worthwhile work.
I agree.
Yes. And
I think it's got sometimes a bit of a bad reputation because of the way it's been, the way in which people perceive the civil service, I think is also articulated by, that old yes minister kind of idea. It's very rooted in like that very colonial understanding of structure and bureaucracy. But I think if you were to maybe slightly dispense with some of that and look really at how ordinary people, very, very ordinary people, are able to be involved in doing things for the betterment of the public. I mean, who doesn't want a police service that you have confidence in?
Quite right. And I think that's a very, very good point to make, because there is a gross misconception. I mean, people, pick up, or will not name the particular newspapers, but certain sections of the news media have a particularly negative reporting slant on the civil service, which I think too controversial. And I think a lot of it, whilst of course there are some examples where mistakes have been made, but the lion's share of the people who are working in the civil service are doing it because they believe in public service, and they're not all on gold-plated pensions. They are ordinary people making a significant contribution to the national picture through whatever work they may do in whichever department they were attached to. And I think that does need to be said. And actually, in a way, you bringing it up, Dee, I think brings out the benefits of what we wanted to achieve with 60 Voices, because we are giving voices to people who did all sorts of jobs, which actually collectively made a significant difference outside. That's exactly.
To the country and to the safe running of the country, the smooth operation of the country. I mean, I never thought about it, but back in the day, when I went to the job centre, I was actually engaging with a civil servant. It was only when I met Sue Gray a little while ago, not name dropping, she was at a conference and we just took a picture together. But she started off her presentation and she said she started off working in the job centre in Tottenham High Road.
Yeah, exactly. It just goes to show that actually career path, because I mean, Jean, your career path, I mean, obviously just reading what you kindly shared with us, you actually did grow, because I think I'm right in saying, obviously, from where you started to when you retired, you built up quite a lot of management skills.
Yes.
And obviously, from a seniority point of view, from where you went in, as you progressed through your journey as a civil servant, you, from the hierarchy point of view, you were moving up the ladder as well.
Well, I only got promoted once, but I did develop a lot of skills, and including interview skills, which I don't think I mentioned before.
Well, the one I was going to also bring up, because you mentioned with your work with the Police Complaints Authority that you were often at press conferences, I think I'm right in saying you had a stint as a press secretary, did you not?
I worked in the press office.
In the press office, yes, that's what I mean. So you were actually dealing with the media.
Dealing with the media.
Yeah.
And I remember somebody, I think it was from the Financial Times, rang up and they wanted to write something about the prison building programme, because we were building quite a lot of prisons then. And if only we'd have carried on that, we would.
Sounds about the same.
Would we?
You might get the call up, Jean.
Yes, prisons expert, come along and help. Yes, I think there's a lot of retired prison service experts, as well as me. My former boss, when he in those days, you had to retire at 60, even men. That's another thing. And he said to me, 60 is far too young to sit in front of the fire in your carpet slippers. And luckily, Mrs. Thatcher was bringing in private prisons in those days, so he got himself a job in the private prison service, because he had very good transferable skills, and no one who hadn't worked in the civil service prison service had them.
Exactly.
The CSRF, the Civil Service Retirement Fellowship,
is a charity set up for civil servants by civil servants. In 1960, Douglas Houghton MP highlighted the need for an organisation that supported retired civil servants offering friendship and companionship. 59 years later, we are still carrying on his dream. You can find out more about the CSRF at our website www.csrf.org.uk. Why not sign up to become a digital donor for £3, less than the price of coffee? Or you may wish to volunteer. Contact us via the website.
I was going to say, obviously, Jean, I mean, your career is fascinating. And I mean, just reading some of the places that you worked and all the things that you did, what on earth made you want to leave? I mean, because I believe you took voluntary redundancy,
Yes.
didn't you? What prompted your exit from the civil service?
Wouldn't have left if where I was working hadn't been being moved to Glasgow, because
Oh.
I'd been there for about 10 years, and that was in the Criminal Injuries Compensation Authority. I'd worked there briefly before my promotion, when it was Criminal Injuries Compensation Board. The Criminal Injuries Compensation Authority gave you a lot more scope, because the board job was submitting papers to a board member who were all Queen's counsels who made awards in accordance with civil law damages for injuries. But it was they changed the scheme, which I'm sure was a lot cheaper, because they didn't need to employ QCs anymore. Probably very expensive, but they had like a schedule of injuries, and you read across, and that was the appropriate compensation. So you had to make sure that that they were eligible for the scheme, that they had suffered a criminal injury, and exactly what the injuries were, what were attributable to the incident, and also calculate any loss of earnings. They could be quite complicated if, for example, a policeman was injured and as a result he couldn't work again as a policeman anyway. Or if he couldn't work again, then you'd do a future loss calculation as well. But that was when I ended up managing over 20 staff as well. And that was towards the end of my career. But the lease on the building apparently was coming to an end, and I think we could have renewed it. Our chief executive, Howard Webber, was very keen for us to do that, but he was overruled by the Home Office. Quite a bit of it, the majority of it, had already moved up to Glasgow. Even before 10 years before, and the Glasgow office was then going to take everything, and we were put under pressure to find ourselves other jobs. We weren't found jobs. We were told we had to spend at least one day a week looking for jobs, and I had to produce weekly figures as to how many of my staff were applying, how many had got interviews, how many had got jobs. So it was a very different atmosphere. Our chief executive, Howard Webber, he of course was looking for another job too. He moved to something I can't remember now, outside the Home Office. I don't think he was very happy with the Home Office as a result of what happened. And I found myself a completely inappropriate job, basically, because I was just under pressure to find something. To cut a long story short, things went from bad to worse, and voluntary redundancy was offered, and I took it at 58.
What do you remember? Sorry, Dee, go.
Sorry, did they provide you when you were, because essentially you've been working for the civil service for over 30 years at that point?
Yes, from 21.
Wow. Did they provide you with any sort of like help to manage the transition in terms of?
No, my question.
Oh, was that? Oh, sorry, Dee. Yeah.
No, that's
I was
good.
going to think about this.
Great
Obviously,
minds think alike.
did they support you and provide you with any support in terms of like, it's almost like if you've been in a relationship for 30 years plus and you extricate yourself from that relationship, it's not easy because it's a 30-year relationship. So did they provide you with anything like to help with your soft landing?
To be absolutely fair, and I know you mentioned it, but I'd forgotten that they did. They run about 6 half-day courses on things like
Oh, well done.
jobs, how to write a CV, um, how to you know prepare for an interview,
Yeah.
how to answer questions at interview. And I took full advantage of those, but by going on them all. So they did do those. But I think years ago, because only like years ago, they just would move you around every 2 or 3 years to gain more experience. Nothing to do with whether or not your job was moving to Glasgow or anything. And that system had completely changed. So you've got people staying in the same place for years and years and years. And if you wanted to move, jobs were advertised and you had to just apply. Now, of course, I didn't think that was very egalitarian because if you're, if somebody's left, say you've got a vacancy from management point of view, and people apply, you do a sift. Obviously, one of the skills I've learned how to do all of that. Then obviously you're going to prioritise people with grade A marks on their reports, aren't you? Whereas years ago we had like a human resources department that would move people around according to not only their skills, but also to gain more experience. And that included everybody, not just the top performers. Well, you wouldn't normally move a poor performer.
That's excellent. No, in a way.
But, the majority of us are middling people. So I thought that, it wasn't an egalitarian change of policy at all, but obviously it meant you could produce staff in HR because HR was basically devolved to management.
Do you remember your last day, Jean, as a civil servant?
Oh yes, well I had a sort of leaving do. The thing was because they offered voluntary redundancy because they wanted to get rid of loads of us, and 50 of us left on the same day.
Wow.
And
That
that was
must have been a hell of a
That wasn't-
party.
I must say that wasn't my last day in criminal injuries. No, because I'd found myself another job by then. People were just sort of going in dribs and drabs. You didn't, that was a very desultory thing, and loads of us moved again, and so there was no collection, there was no card or anything. You just because it was just not feasible because there were everybody was expected to just find themselves somewhere to go to and go. But on my final day, it was I was in IND by then, and 50 of us from several buildings, including Croydon, all left on the same day. So you can imagine there was I shared my leaving do with another person who was going on the same day called Ron, and we had it in the pub. And luckily, quite a lot of other people eventually came. But there must have been some people, having different leaving do's, mainly in pubs, where you wouldn't have many, or you might have done. I don't know if anybody did like a pub crawl of circulation of different ones. Yes, but that was it was nice to to go.
Could I just ask a question? Are you in contact with any of the people that you left on that day with, or have you still got, communications with them?
Yes, I got a postcard. It's on my sideboard over there, so I won't move. From Ron and his wife Sue.
Oh.
And we sent each other postcards from our holidays. But I haven't been in touch with them, although I've got an email address apart from that.
Yeah.
I've got a question, Jean. How did you discover, how did you hear about the Civil Service Retirement Fellowship? Because obviously, I mean, was it well promoted in your department? Were you made aware of it when you went through your retirement journey or your transition out of work?
I can't remember, to be honest, but in my job searching days, I know that I didn't always have enough to do towards the end, and in the civil service, you're allowed to do up to 5 days a year paid voluntary work. And that seemed to me to be a useful and good idea. I'd gain more skills. I'd kill a bit of time and so on. But I'm not sure exactly how I heard about it, to be honest. And I know I did one or two bits of voluntary work including one bit inside the civil service. But I can't. It must have been probably within the civil service. But you probably remember because you were there when when I turned up.
I do. I remember the first day you walked into the office many moons ago, and you're still with us, which is
Yes,
lovely.
that's right. So yes, once I took voluntary redundancy, I had more time to assist in the office, and then when I found myself a job, I was less able to do that. And then when I finally retired at 61 from the Open University, then I was free again to come and help in the office.
The CSRF, the Civil Service Retirement Fellowship, is a charity set up for civil servants by civil servants. In 1960, Douglas Houghton MP highlighted the need for an organisation that supported retired civil servants offering friendship and companionship. 59 years later, we are still carrying on his dream. You can find out more about the CSRF at our website www.csrf.org.uk. Why not sign up to become a digital donor for £3, less than the price of coffee? Or you may wish to volunteer. Contact us via the website.
So, when you retired, obviously you left, and then the world was your oyster, I would imagine, Jean. So, what? Tell us more about what's been. I mean, firstly, what you did. You've obviously said you did some volunteering. You obviously, and we know you obviously came and volunteered with us. But how has retirement been for you? If you were going to give the people listening to this podcast thinking, oh, retirement's around the corner, what have we got to look forward to? What would your highlights or lowlights or funny stories? What about what you've done since you left the service? So it'd be great to share some of that with us.
Well, I think that you go through various stages of retirement, not only due to your physical health, but your external circumstances. When I retired, my partner was still working, although he was 3 years older than me, and he got made redundant. So I was helping him with his job search, and also it meant that I got free time and he hadn't. So things to do, like he needed a new mattress, and I thought we might look at the weekend, but it never happened. So I chose one in a sale and arranged for it to be delivered, and he paid. It also gave me a lot more time to do cooking, which I enjoy, and give us nice meals and organise holidays and things. Also, I used to visit my mum once a week because she's 30 years older than me. So when I retired at 61, she was 91 then, and so she's needed a certain amount of help. Also, I was able to develop hobbies. I took a City and Guilds Level 1 course in cake decorating.
Wow.
Get me.
Excuse me, why have we not seen any of the evidence in the office, Jean?
Well, yeah, I haven't done much of it. I've done more just enjoy ordinary making cakes.
Yeah.
I've
We should set you a task to do a 60th anniversary cake for the CSRF.
and well, I think that's yes. I've lost the skills now, really.
She says quietly.
Exactly.
There was about 7 of us. One dropped out. There was one person in particular, well, at least a couple who were really, really talented. One of them was a Polish lady. It was mainly for people running their own business, and her cakes were absolutely brilliant. And she had a good market because, of course, there's various Polish folk stories and so on. She could make children's cakes. A lot of them, had children, and also birthday cakes, and obviously, right, happy birthday in Polish on them, and cakes to do with the Polish folk tales. So she was already running a lucrative business amongst the Polish community.
Very good. What other things did you enjoy? Obviously, you did travel. You mentioned travel. I mean, where's been the favourite place you've been since you retired on a travel point of view?
Well, at first, my partner was alive, and we didn't know there was anything wrong with him. So I think Thailand was our most adventurous holiday.
Oh, wow.
But later on, of course, I also joined a walking group, and also I'd already acquired a laptop by then, and the local Age UK run computer classes, which I still go to because I very, very much need.
Could I just ask you, so during your work while you were in the civil service, did they not have computers and stuff like that?
Well, that's another one of the changes that I didn't mention, because, of course, when I started in the 70s, we didn't have them, and then they came in the 80s. But when we first got one, we didn't have one on each desk. There was about 4 of us in a room, and there was just one shared computer in the center of the room. And I remember my line manager saying to me, you should check your emails once a day. And I thought, chance would be a fine thing, because you couldn't sit at the computer whenever you wanted, because there was often someone else there. So that was very much a learning curve and a skill that I gradually developed. And of course, we were sent on courses on how to use Word, even, basic things like how to change the typeface, how to change the size of it, how to underline, all sorts of basic stuff we didn't know.
So part of your approach in your work, and I would say in your retirement, was to be constantly learning something.
It was really, yes. Oh, and also because I had worked for almost 2.5 years on a part-time basis with the Open University. Well, they sent me on the European Computer Driving License course, and also they run courses called Open Learn, which were free courses.
Very
And
good.
I did. My main subject at degree level was English, and I did a very interesting one called Shakespeare and His World, and also another one on forensic science. And they're still available, and they're very useful if you're interested in a wide range of things to do if you've got a computer to do at home when you're retired. Open Learn.
One thing I
Excellent.
One thing I was going to add, Jean, of course, which you also got involved with on retirement, was you became a founding member of our book club, which you have
That's
been
right.
very heavily
Very
involved
much
with
so.
for many, many
Yes.
years.
Yes, I
We've,
heard about
we've,
that.
we've seen evolution in that, haven't we? Because when we first started the book club, we didn't have Zoom meetings. It was very much individual. They would get sent a book, they could review it, they could post their review online,
Right.
obviously share their thoughts with other people. But then during COVID, we wanted to bring that sort of sense of connection back. And someone said, well, why don't you do it on Zoom? And we were all going, what the hell is Zoom at the time? And now, of course, it's part of the national consciousness, I think, in terms of doing business. But it has transformed, I think, hasn't it, Jean, the book group being online, because it allows you an opportunity to actually see and talk with the people, albeit via a video camera.
But you'll remember even that it evolved, because when it first came out, if once people had read the book, they could actually write their review on an actual piece of paper, post it to the CSRF, and you would put it online for them.
Indeed, indeed.
Computer. And in fact, I probably did that myself to start with.
Yes, I think you did. Yeah, you did. But now, of course, with your Age UK IT support, you're tapping away like no tomorrow. So
Can I ask? Oh, sorry, Dean.
I go after you.
So I was going to say to you, Jean, what are your thoughts about the future in terms of your own retirement and the way you see yourself moving forward with the skills you've learned, the career you've had, all of those opportunities? What's your thoughts about moving forward and how that happens?
Well, I think the main thing is to keep healthy, really, because without mobility and sane mind, I would need a lot of support. So things like a walking group, that they provide sociability, and they also provide exercise. And I go swimming as well.
Wow.
And I visit my mum regularly, so keeping in touch with people, exercising, and probably eventually it will be accepting limitations, possibly hearing, hopefully not dementia, but a very high proportion of people have got it apparently. I'm in a flat which doesn't have a lift. I've got to get up 2 flights of stairs.
No.
But so I'm enjoying myself as much as I can, learning as much as I can, going to places as much as I can, obviously within budget and feasibility and and so on. Um, but I don't know what the future holds, and one does become more apprehensive about it as one gets older, especially when you haven't got children.
But well, I think your attitude to the future is a very positive one, because I only joined the CSRF about 2.5 years ago, and I met you there, and I know the work that you do to provide support to the members of the CSRF family. And I think that's an integral thing that we at the CSRF are interested in demonstrating, that people have a role to play in the civil service after retirement. And that's what we're about. And I think you're a shining example of that. And given that that's the case, what plans have you for your next holiday adventure, Jean? Where are you off to?
Well, I've just come back from 4 nights in the Black Forest. I've got nothing planned more this year, but I do plan to go on another.
I think you can share where you're heading next year, Jean. Where away?
Into Indochina. I don't know if I can share who I'm going with.
Well, you can. I'm sure. They
It's
work-
good promotion.
exactly. They work.
She may want to sponsor our podcast in the future. So yeah.
They give you, if you've already been on a holiday with them, they give you a discount on the next.
There you go. Nicely done.
Yes.
So how long is the trip for this time, and how long does it take to get there?
I'm not sure how long the journey is. It's a bit confusing because of the time difference as well, you see. So that'd be quite difficult for me to work out.
But I think it's really interesting that you would choose to go to somewhere like China and you're exploring the Pacific, especially how our relationship with these countries are changing. And as a civil servant, a previous civil servant, you can look at the world differently, because at one point you were looking at the world through post-Cold War eyes. And now you're looking at the world in a more multipolar way. And, going to these places, experiencing their culture, learning about them, that can only feed, greater curiosity and also better understanding.
Indeed, and the book club is very relevant to that, because our latest book is covering
Half a minute done.
the war in Nigeria, between Nigeria and Biafra in the 70s.
Wow.
Very good.
And it was interesting. Years ago, you could go to Russia on holiday. You certainly wouldn't go there now.
No. So,
And we don't even fly over Russian airspace, so you certainly wouldn't be able to fly there, and it wouldn't be a sensible thing to do. My lack of security knowledge, I know that.
well, Jean, I think, just to conclude, I would like to say, obviously, just to echo Denise's point, it's been an absolute pleasure. I mean, I've known you for many years, and obviously I remember when you first joined as a volunteer. It's been fascinating to learn that I didn't actually know you as well as I thought I did. And I've learned lots more about you that hitherto I was completely unaware of. And it's been lovely to hear how you've learned and grown as an individual, and all of the things that you've experienced in every stage of your career, both in the civil service and after you left. And you are, steal the phrase that's already been used, you are a very good shining example of how to make the most of retirement. I think, as the inaugural interviewee on our 60 Voices project, you couldn't be a better choice of candidate, because
100%.
people like you are as essential to any organization. You are there, you are supportive and
Reliable.
and what you deliver is
Exactly.
gold dust. And you are there, even though people may not know you are there, but you are, and you are providing essential. So it's been an awfully great pleasure for me to obviously work with you for 15, 16 years, but also to have you on as our first interviewee. So a big thank you, Jean, for sharing your memories, both of work and retirement. And to all of those of you who are listening, I hope you've enjoyed our first podcast, and that you take the time to tune in and keep an eye, follow us on Spotify, where you will see this playing. Keep an eye on our website, because we will be interviewing many more people in the months ahead. And if indeed you are inspired to be a candidate yourself, you can reach out to the Civil Service Retirement Fellowship using the contacts on our website, and we will be delighted to send you an intro interview form to get you on the podcast as well. So please help spread the word. We are brand new to this, so it's a work in progress, even though I have a seasoned pro as a broadcaster, broadcasting deputy, luckily for me. And I hope you've enjoyed the experience as much as we all have. And Jean, thanks again for everything you've done.
Thank you for having me.
The CSRF, the Civil Service Retirement Fellowship, is a charity set up for civil servants by civil servants. In 1960, Douglas Houghton MP highlighted the need for an organisation that supported retired civil servants offering friendship and companionship. 59 years later, we are still carrying on his dream. You can find out more about the CSRF at our website, www.csrf.org.uk. Why not sign up to become a digital donor for £3, less than the price of coffee? Or you may wish to volunteer. Contact us via the website.